This video is presented by Musicbed. Scan the QR code or use the link below to start your free trial today. This is the Light Lens Lab 35mm f1.4, modeled after the double aspherical Leica Summilux of the 80s and 90s. I'm in Toronto for a few days, so I figured this would be a great spot to do some street photos. So join me, let's go check this thing out. So we were in Toronto for a DJI event, so a bunch of the clips you're going to see here are from the Osmo Pocket 4. And while I would definitely not say that street photography is my forte by any means, it did give us plenty of opportunity to kind of explore the city and give me an opportunity to see how this lens performs in a lot of different ways. I definitely switch back and forth a lot between wide open, like this shot here, and then a lot of stuff at f8. So you basically are getting kind of a landscape and street photography vibe, but also I tried to take a lot of opportunities to show the character of the lens as well. And before you even get into image quality and stuff like that, I think that obviously buying a vintage inspired lens is going to be because you want the look and feel of something that has a little bit more character. So we'll jump into that in a bit. All right, just got back from Toronto, made hundreds and hundreds of images with this thing actually. And it surprised me in a lot of ways, and some ways that even when I did a couple shots kind of side by side with my Summilux here, I had to go back again after I did those and go, did I shoot these wrong? Did I mess this up? So first of all, obviously this is a kind of like a modern interpretation, I guess, of this double aspherical lens. There's plenty of videos that go into kind of like the lore of this thing. Basically what happened is in, I think 1988, they made only a few thousand of these. It was just too expensive of a process for them to do. Really, really limited run. They can be incredibly expensive. So that's the kind of cool thing that Light Lens Lab is doing, is they're taking a lot of much more unattainable lenses to the general public and making modern interpretations of those. They're not the exact same thing. There's plenty of videos. I think Bobby Tonelli made a video where he took the original one, a few other people have as well, and compared the image quality. Now, I don't have access to an original, but I do have access to what is the current optical formula, at least. This is one generation back of Summilux, but it's the most modern optical formula currently. So at least we can compare it to, you know, like a lens that came out 20 years later than what we have here. Now, as you probably noticed as well, I have a titanium version. It's not something that they came out with when the original lens happened. They mostly came in black, a few came in silver, and those ones are incredibly expensive on the internet. But I will say that I really like this titanium. This is a sample model. I don't get to keep it or anything, but it is something that I messaged them, was like, is there any way I could like buy this from you or anything? And they said, no, I'm sorry. This is a sample. You need to send it back to us after this. So I don't own any titanium lenses, but I do own plenty of silver models. And while the silver looks amazing and I really like that contrast, I think there's something really cool and subtle about this. And as someone who appreciates unique things, just like I have a bunch of silver lenses that most people don't have as well, it's kind of a fun little novelty. But obviously both of these are kind of supposed to be, you know, 35 Summilux style lenses, and you can see here that they are pretty similar in size. The 35 Summilux, like the actual Leica version, is a little bit thicker and a little bit wider. And without their lens hoods though, they are pretty darn similar in their, I don't know, general size and weight. I want to take a quick second to pay some bills and thank today's sponsor, Musicbed, for supporting the channel. If you're like me, busy season is here, and if you've ever tried to edit a film with music that almost fits, you absolutely understand how frustrating this is. Especially for a wedding film, almost fitting just doesn't cut it, when the whole point is that when someone watches this film 10 years from now, they feel something. And you want it to be that same thing you felt while filming it. And that's why I use Musicbed. We have real music, real artists, real songs written by people with something to say, not generated by an algorithm trying to just approximate emotion for you. So when I'm either starting a project or even deep in an edit and looking for a song that carries a specific feeling, I'm legitimately excited to go to Musicbed and search for a song that's actually going to help me fulfill my creative vision. And it's not something I take for granted. The music shapes everything from the pacing, the color grade, the story I choose to tell. When you get the right song, the whole film just flows. So if you're heading into busy season like me and you want your work to feel the way you actually intended it to feel, switch to Musicbed with a 14-day free trial in the link down below and let it elevate your work just like it's elevated mine. Now, as far as image quality is concerned, this is modeled after a late 80s lens, but there's something pretty interesting that I know I just pushed this away, but that, again, I did some side-by-side comparison shooting here, and they both were great in some ways and interesting in other ways. So if you look here at these examples, the 35 Summilux, the actual Leica aspherical version here, it is a little bit sharper in the middle and like you get a little bit less chromatic aberration, but this lens did come out in like 2008, 2009, something like that. So it's not like as modern and as refined to these super high resolution sensors. But because of that, you get some of that vintage feel and charm. And with that vintage feel and charm that I'm mentioning here, I was actually really surprised because the bokeh on the 35 Summilux here is what I actually expected the bokeh from the Light Lens Lab double aspherical one to look like. It is actually more vintage, in my opinion, than the Light Lens Lab, at least in these kind of close focus tests. But you get a lot more of that kind of like, I don't know, like old school vintage bokeh where you get some of the kind of like outline and overlap and it looks a little bit busy, where the Light Lens Lab here is actually a little bit more modern of bokeh, which is really interesting. It's slightly more cat's eye and you definitely get some swirling. There's other issues going on here that we'll talk about afterwards. But as far as just like the way the bokeh itself is rendered, the Light Lens Lab is actually what I would consider a more modern bokeh look. But if you just looked at them side by side, I wouldn't necessarily say that the Light Lens Lab has less character than the Summilux, but just in terms of like the bokeh itself, I do feel like the Light Lens Lab, it just feels more modern and more like a newer lens. I would expect that from, at least, where the Summilux here is, I don't know, much more vintage feeling, which is something that really surprised me considering what they're kind of trying to go after here. Now, what I will say though, is that something that I've talked a lot about with the Mandler lenses and things is that this lens has some field curvature to it. By the way, you might see Dave Herring in this. This is Dave Herring's camera strap. I decided to check it out. I'll leave a link to his stuff below. But the way that it works for this lens, at least, is that the Mandler lens, the field of plane of focus kind of bowed towards the camera. And with this one, it bows slightly away from the camera. So things on the edges are going to be more in focus as you go away from the lens than closer to the lens, where the Mandler one was pretty heavy, where this one just has a slight movement in the inverse, towards or away from the camera, I guess. But it's not like extreme by any means. So if you stop down to f8 or whatever, I did a ton of images at f8 here, you can definitely just still get sharp images without any real issue. So you get some kind of funk towards the edges of the frame, which is definitely not something I mind, because if I'm going to be shooting with a lens like this, I'm not going to expect like Sony G Master levels of just sharpness. I'm not expecting it to be like the 35 Apo or something like that. This is going to be more of like a character lens, something I'm pulling this out so I can shoot it at 1.4 and so that I can get a cool and interesting and unique look. So all I have to say, I think this is a really cool lens. I like almost everything that Light Lens Lab puts out. So to have something that looks this good on a camera, has a lot of the kind of like homage style things to lenses that just aren't available anymore and haven't been in production for decades. And while it being like a modern interpretation of that, I think is really cool. If you're like a landscape photographer, should you buy this lens? Probably not. But if you like character at 1.4 while still having pretty decent sharpness, like I think I would absolutely shoot weddings on this. I think I would absolutely do portraits on this. It would be something that if I did not have the 35 Summilux already, I would absolutely consider purchasing this instead. At like even used prices, this would be far less than half the price of the 35 Summilux. So if I'm being completely honest, I am considering picking one of these up and making it my kind of like fast lens for my M6. I know I already have like the Mandler lenses and like the 40 millimeter Summicrons and all sorts of other lenses that I toss on my M6 a lot. But there's been plenty of times where I've been just tossing my 35 Summilux back and forth, especially at weddings and things like that, where I do want a little bit more of a shallow depth of field and stuff. So the times where I do want to have both on, I just think that this could be a really cool combo. And especially because this lens is of the same kind of era as my M6 as well, both coming out kind of in the 80s. So it's absolutely something I'm considering kind of marrying to my M6. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. I'd love to kind of help out with this kind of stuff. You can actually check out my video on the Light Lens Lab 35 8 element right here. Check out another video that YouTube thinks you'd like up here, and I'll see you in one of those.